Take a look in the mirror, Esther. Michael's voice cut through the chapel like shattered glass. Did you really think a man like me would marry someone who looks like you? His laughter echoed off the vaulted ceiling, sharp and deliberate. The church fell silent. 300 guests held their breath. Cameras rose like predators sensing blood. Welcome back to another unforgettable story. Thank you so much for being here. Don't forget to comment below and let me know where you're watching from. Now let's dive in. Esther stood beneath the altar, her white lace gown suddenly feeling like a costume, like evidence of her own foolishness. She'd spent 8 months planning this day, 8 months of choosing flowers, tasting cakes, addressing invitations in her careful handwriting. The dress had taken 3 fittings to get right. She'd wanted everything to be perfect. Michael wiped his hands on his gray suit jacket as if touching her had left a stain. God, I can't believe I almost went through with this, he said to his groomsmen, loud enough for the front rows to hear. My boys bet me I couldn't keep this charade going for a whole year. Easiest money I ever made. The words arrived in fragments, refusing to form coherent meaning. Esther's bouquet, white roses and baby's breath, trembled in her hands. Show her, one of the groomsmen urged, barely containing his grin. Michael pulled out his phone, angling the screen toward her. Text messages, hundreds of them, him and his friends laughing about her African accent, her nervousness around his wealthy friends, the way she practiced Korean phrases in the mirror, screenshots of her Instagram posts with mocking captions. She actually thinks I love her, one read. Watch this. I'm going to make her cry tonight, said another. You were so easy to manipulate, Michael continued, his handsome face transforming into something unrecognizable. Every time you asked if something was wrong, I'd just kiss your forehead, and you'd melt. Pathetic, really. A woman emerged from the back pew. Esther recognized her immediately. Diana, the heiress Michael had introduced as a potential investor in his business. She wore a white dress, too, silk where Esther's was lace, designer where Esther's was carefully saved for. Sorry about the theatrics, Diana said, linking her arm through Michael's with practiced ease. But we needed everyone here to witness this. You see, Michael and I have been engaged for 3 months. Real engagement, not this charity project. She gestured dismissively at Esther. We just had to wait until you'd paid for the venue, the flowers, the catering. Why waste our money when you were so eager to prove yourself? The chapel tilted sideways. Esther's vision tunneled. She heard herself make a sound, something between a gasp and a sob, the raw noise of understanding. That $60,000 you gave me for my business expansion, Michael added casually. Bought Diana's engagement ring, 60 carats. She deserves the best, you know. Not like... He paused, looking Esther up and down with theatrical disgust. Well, not like you. The groomsmen laughed and the sound multiplied, bouncing off stone walls, growing into something monstrous. Phones captured every angle. Esther could see herself on their screens, fractured into a dozen different perspectives of humiliation. Smile for the camera, someone called out. This is going to be legendary. Her knees buckled. The white runner rushed up to meet her. She caught herself on her palms, and her carefully pinned veil tore loose, tumbling around her shoulders like a broken wing. Mud from someone's shoe print stained the ivory lace. Oh my God, she's actually crying, Diana laughed, the sound crystalline and cruel. Michael, you said she'd at least try to keep some dignity. Guess I overestimated her, Michael replied, already turning away, already forgetting her. The phone circled closer, a constellation of cold glass eyes, capturing, recording, broadcasting. Within minutes, the video would trend. Within an hour, millions would watch her break. Ugly bride dumped. She thought he loved her. Reality. Esther couldn't breathe. Each inhale felt like swallowing broken glass. 4 years of friendship with Diana, all calculated deception. 18 months of love with Michael, choreographed cruelty. Every whispered promise, every gentle touch lies wrapped in prettier lies. The laughter grew louder, feeding on itself, becoming a living thing that pressed down on her shoulders. Then, silence. Not gradual, abrupt, violent. The sound of the chapel doors slamming open shattered through the mockery like a gunshot. The heavy oak crashed against stone walls with enough force that the crystal chandeliers trembled. Every head turned. A man entered, and the atmosphere changed. It wasn't gradual. The air itself seemed to contract, becoming dense and difficult to breathe. Michael's laughter died mid-note. Diana's smile froze into something grotesque. He wore a black tuxedo, perfectly tailored, the kind of expensive that whispered rather than shouted. His shoes clicked against marble with measured precision, each step deliberate, unhurried. But it was the tattoo that made people stumble backward, that made the groomsmen lower their phones with trembling hands. A black snake wound up his neck from beneath his crisp white collar, intricate scales catching the light, the serpent's head resting just below his jawline. Its mouth was open, ready to strike. The guests recognized him. Some gasped. Others reached for the people beside them, as if proximity to others might offer protection. In Seoul's dangerous circles, this man didn't need introduction. Seong Hwan, the Viper. The Kangpai boss whose name was spoken in whispers, whose territory extended into shadows, polite society pretended didn't exist. He didn't look at Michael, didn't acknowledge Diana or the groomsmen scrambling away. His eyes, dark and burning, with something cold and ancient, locked onto Esther. She was still on the ground, mascara tracking down her cheeks, her dress ruined, her dignity scattered like broken glass across marble floors. Seong Hwan walked straight to her, no hesitation, no pause. His hand reached down, fingers threading through her hair at the crown of her head, gripping with possessive intensity. Not gentle, not cruel, claiming. He pulled her upright with one fluid motion, and suddenly she was standing, her body pressed against his other arm wrapping around her waist like a promise or a threat. The chapel held its breath. Seong Hwan's gaze finally moved to Michael, and something in that look made the groom stumble backward, colliding with his best man. When the Viper spoke, his voice was soft, almost conversational. It was somehow more terrifying than if he'd shouted. "This wedding is over." He turned Esther's face toward his chest, shielding her from the cameras, from the stares, from the humiliation. "She belongs to me now." "Wait," Michael's voice cracked. "You can't just—" Seong Hwan's eyes cut to him, and Michael's words dissolved into silence. The Viper didn't raise his voice, didn't need to. "You owe me a debt, Michael. 3,000,001. Did you think I'd forget?" His hand tightened protectively around Esther's waist. "Consider this payment. The woman you were too blind to value, I'm taking as mine. And if you ever speak her name again, I'll collect the rest of what you owe me in ways you won't survive." The threat hung in the air, tangible as smoke. Michael's face drained of color. Diana stepped away from him, suddenly remembering she had somewhere else to be. Seong Hwan lifted Esther effortlessly, cradling her against his chest as if she weighed nothing. Her fingers clutched at his tuxedo jacket instinctively. She should have been afraid. This was a stranger, a dangerous man, someone whose reputation preceded him like a warning, but all she felt was the warmth of his body, the steady beat of his heart beneath her palm, and the shocking realization that for the first time in 18 months, she felt safe. He carried her down the aisle, past the frozen guests, past the phones that no longer dared to film, past the ruins of her old life. The doors swung closed behind them with a sound like a coffin ceiling, and in that moment, Esther's story, the real one, finally began. Stories like this deserve to be remembered. Subscribe to be part of the next one, and tell me which scene hit you the hardest and where you are watching from. The black Mercedes idled outside the chapel, engine purring like a caged predator. Seong Hwan's driver, a mountain of a man with scarred knuckles, held the door open without expression, as if carrying devastated brides away from ruined weddings was merely another Tuesday. Esther's mind felt distant from her body, wrapped in cotton and static. She registered details in fragments, the leather seat cool against her legs, the faint scent of sandalwood, and something darker, the way Seong Hwan's hand remained on the small of her back, even after settling her inside. Not pushing, just present, claiming space. Through the tinted window, she watched the chapel recede. Michael stood in the doorway, Diana clutching his arm, both of them frozen like mannequins in a store window. The guests spilled onto the steps, phones still raised, capturing everything, always capturing. "Where are you taking me?" Her voice emerged smaller than she'd intended, fractured at the edges. Seong Hwan didn't look at her. His gaze remained fixed on something beyond the windshield, his jaw set in a line that suggested the question was irrelevant. "Somewhere Michael can't humiliate you again." "I don't know you." The words should have carried fear, accusation. Instead, they just sounded tired. "No," he agreed quietly, "but I know you." Before she could process that impossible statement, exhaustion crashed over her like a wave. The adrenaline that had kept her upright drained away, leaving nothing but bone-deep weariness. Her eyelids grew heavy. The city lights blurred into watercolor streaks. She didn't remember falling asleep, didn't remember the drive through Seoul's glittering streets, past the tourist districts, and into the neighborhoods where old money kept its secrets. Didn't remember being carried from the car, cradled against a chest that smelled of expensive cologne and danger. Esther woke to silence. Not the comfortable quiet of safety, but the thick, muffled hush of soundproofed walls and sealed windows. Her eyes opened to unfamiliar darkness, broken only by the glow of city lights filtering through floor-to-ceiling glass. She lay in a bed large enough to get lost in, wrapped in sheets with a thread count she couldn't begin to guess. Panic arrived slowly, then, all at once. She bolted upright, her wedding dress gone, replaced by an oversized white shirt that smelled like sandalwood. Like him, the room materialized around her in pieces. Minimalist furniture in black and chrome, artwork that probably cost more than her yearly salary, a door that might have been an exit or might have been locked. Her bare feet hit cold marble as she stumbled toward the window. Seoul spread out below her, a constellation of lights and steel, so far down that vertigo pulled at her stomach. She pressed her palm against the glass, felt its chill, its solidity. 40 floors up, maybe more. High enough that jumping would be suicide. High enough that screaming would be pointless. "You're awake." Esther spun, her heart slamming against her ribs. Seong Hwan stood in the doorway she hadn't heard open, still wearing his tuxedo pants and white shirt, though he'd discarded the jacket and bow tie. The snake tattoo seemed more vivid in the low light, more alive. His sleeves were rolled to his elbows, revealing more ink, patterns she couldn't make out in the shadows. "Where am I?" She hated how her voice shook, hated giving him that evidence of fear. "My home." He moved into the room with that same measured pace from the chapel, each step deliberate, not rushing, not retreating. "The penthouse, 47th floor. The elevator requires a key code and retinal scan. The stairs are monitored. The windows don't open." He paused, letting that information settle. "You're safe here." "Safe?" The word tasted bitter. "You kidnapped me. I saved you." His correction was gentle, almost kind, which somehow made it worse. "From a man who was broadcasting your humiliation to millions. From a wedding that would have destroyed you." He stopped a few feet away, maintaining distance, his hands loose at his sides. "I took you before you became a permanent spectacle. You don't get to make that choice for me." Michael already made the choice. I simply altered the outcome. Seong Hwan's dark eyes held hers, unblinking. "Tell me, Esther, would you prefer to be back in that chapel? Would you prefer the cameras, the laughter, the pity? Her silence was answer enough. He moved to a chrome bar cart near the window, poured amber liquid into 2 glasses. Whiskey, probably. Something expensive that she wouldn't know how to appreciate. He offered her one. She didn't take it. Michael owes me 3,000,001, Seong Hwan said, taking a measured sip from his own glass. Gambling debts. He's been dodging payment for 6 months, hiding behind his father's name and his fiancé's money. The word fiancé carried particular venom. Your money, I should say. The 60,000 you gave him, I can have it back by morning if you'd like. Esther's throat tightened. How do you know about that? I know everything about Michael's finances. It's my business to know. He set his glass down, turned to face her fully. He thought marrying Diana would solve his problems, thought her family's wealth would cover what he owes me. He was wrong. So you took me as what? Collateral? I took you as payment. The Chatzah distinction seemed important to him. The debt is now settled. You belong to me instead of him. People aren't property. But even as she said it, Esther remembered the way Michael had talked about her, the screenshots, the bets. Maybe she'd been property all along, just to the wrong person. Seong Hwan's expression softened almost imperceptibly. No, they're not, which is why I'm giving you a choice. He crossed to a desk she hadn't noticed, returned with a leather folder. A contract, 1 year. You pretend to be my wife, attend events, live here, present the image of a stable, legitimate businessman with a respectable marriage. Why would you need that? Because the authorities are watching, because my rivals smell weakness, because a man like me, unmarried at 35, raises questions I'd prefer not to answer. He held out the folder. In exchange, I give you protection, security, anything you want. After 1 year, you're free to leave with enough money to start over anywhere in the world. Esther stared at the contract like it might bite her. And if I refuse? Then you're free to leave now. I'll have my driver take you wherever you want to go. Your apartment, a friend's house, the airport. His voice remained level, factual. But the video is still out there, trending. Millions have seen Michael humiliate you. By morning, your face will be on every news site, every gossip blog. You'll be the woman too ugly to marry, forever. The cruelty of truth. She could walk out that door and reclaim her freedom, but she'd never reclaim her dignity. The internet was forever. The mockery was forever. Or, Seong Hwan continued quietly, you stay, and tomorrow the headlines change. Bride stolen by billionaire. Mystery woman captures heart of Seoul's most eligible bachelor. Suddenly, you're not the joke, you're the prize. Esther's hands trembled as she took the folder. The contract was thick, official, filled with legal language she'd need a lawyer to interpret. But the core terms were clear enough. 1 year of marriage, public appearances, no physical intimacy required unless mutually agreed upon, separate bedrooms, generous monthly allowance, freedom after 12 months. This is insane, she whispered. Yes, he agreed. But so was believing Michael loved you. The words were surgical in their precision, cutting straight through to bone. Esther flinched, and something flickered across Seong Hwan's face. Regret, maybe, or recognition of having gone too far. I apologize, he said, and it sounded genuine. That was cruel. You deserve better than him, better than this. He gestured at the penthouse, at the gilded cage he was offering. But this is what I can give you. Protection, revenge, a chance to rebuild. She looked at him then, really looked, past the tattoos and the expensive clothes and the reputation that preceded him like a warning. She saw exhaustion in the lines around his eyes, a tension in his shoulders that suggested he carried weights she couldn't see. He was dangerous, yes, probably violent, definitely involved in things that never saw daylight, but he'd come for her. When she was drowning, when the world was laughing, He'd silenced the room with 5 words and carried her to safety. 1 year, she said softly. 1 year, he confirmed. Esther signed the contract with a pen that probably cost more than her wedding dress. Each stroke of ink felt like rewriting her story, changing the ending Michael had tried to force on her. Seong Hwan took the folder, placed it carefully on the desk. There are clothes in the closet, your size. Tomorrow we'll get you more. Anything you want. I don't want your money. Too bad. You have it anyway. He moved toward the door, paused at the threshold. Get some rest. The world will be watching tomorrow. You'll need your strength. Wait. The word escaped before she could stop it. Why me? Really? Why not just pay Michael off and be done with it? Seong Hwan's hand tightened on the doorframe. For a long moment, he didn't answer. Then, without turning around, he said, because watching you break tonight felt like watching something precious shatter, and I'm very good at taking things other people are too stupid to value. He left, the door clicking shut with mechanical precision. Esther stood alone in the silent penthouse, 47 floors above a city that had watched her humiliation, and wondered if she'd just made a deal with the devil or if the devil had just saved her life. The sun rose over Seoul like a wound opening, painting the sky in shades of amber and blood. Esther woke to find a breakfast tray outside her door. Fresh fruit, Korean pastries, coffee that smelled like it cost more per cup than she used to spend on groceries. A note in sharp, precise handwriting. Wear the blue dress. We have an appointment at 11. The closet was a revelation. Not just clothes, but armor. Designer pieces still bearing their tags, shoes organized by height and color, jewelry that glinted like captured stars. She found the blue dress exactly where she somehow knew it would be. A midnight silk that skimmed her curves without apology, transforming her body into something powerful rather than something to be mocked. She stared at herself in the floor-length mirror. The woman looking back was a stranger, polished, elegant, expensive. Not the bride who'd collapsed on a chapel floor. Someone new, someone harder. Seong Hwan was waiting in the living room, dressed in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than a car. His eyes tracked over her, assessing, and she watched something shift in his expression. Appreciation, maybe more. Good, was all he said. Let's go. The appointment turned out to be a charity luncheon at Seoul's most exclusive hotel. Old money and older power, the kind of crowd where every smile was a negotiation and every conversation was theater. Esther felt their eyes the moment she entered on Seong Hwan's arm, curiosity, judgment, fascination. Smile, he murmured, his hand warm and steady at the small of her back. Like you belong here. I don't. You do now. A woman in pearls and designer tweed approached, her smile sharp enough to draw blood. Seong Hwan, darling, and this must be your new companion. The pause before companion was deliberate, loaded with implications. My wife, he corrected smoothly. Esther. The woman's smile faltered. How unexpected. I hadn't heard about a wedding. It was private, intimate. Seong Hwan's hand tightened possessively on Esther's waist. You understand, I'm sure. Some moments are too precious to share with the world. The lie was delivered with such conviction that even Esther almost believed it. The woman in pearls made polite noises and retreated, already pulling out her phone to spread the news. They moved through the crowd like predators in a herd, Seong Hwan introducing her to people whose names she'd only seen in headlines. Each introduction followed the same pattern: shock, poorly concealed curiosity, and then forced politeness. She was an anomaly in their world, a puzzle that didn't fit their understanding of who Seong Hwan was or what he wanted. She's very exotic, isn't she? The comment came from an older man in an expensive suit, delivered to Seong Hwan as if Esther weren't standing right there. Where did you find her? Esther felt herself shrink, old insecurities rising like floodwater. But before she could respond, Seong Hwan's hand moved from her waist to her shoulder, pulling her closer. "She's not a souvenir I picked up on vacation, Director Kim. She's my wife. And if you speak about her like that again, we'll have problems." His voice remained pleasant, conversational. The threat lived in his eyes. Director Kim's face went pale. He mumbled an apology and fled. "You didn't have to do that," Esther said quietly. "Yes," Seong Hwan replied, "I did." They found seats at a table near the window. Sunlight streamed through crystal glasses, painting rainbow fractals across white tablecloths. Esther picked at her food, hyper-aware of the stares, the whispers behind hands. "Look at me." His command was soft but absolute. She raised her eyes to his. "You're going to hear worse than that. They'll call you worse. Some will say you trapped me. Others will say I'm slumming. None of it matters. Easy for you to say. You're not the one they're dissecting. No, I'm the one they fear, and you're mine, which means they'll fear you too." He reached across the table, his fingers brushing her wrist. The touch was electric, unexpected. "Trust the process, Esther. By the time we're done, they'll be begging for your approval." That night, back in the penthouse, Esther found herself drawn to his study. The door was open, an invitation or oversight. Inside, the room smelled of leather and old paper, walls lined with books in Korean and English. A desk dominated one corner, its surface clean except for a single photograph frame face down. She shouldn't have looked, knew it was a violation, but her fingers were already lifting the frame, already revealing the image beneath. Her breath caught. It was her. Years ago, standing outside a hospital, crying. She remembered that day with brutal clarity, the day her grandmother's surgery had been scheduled, the day she'd been told the cost was impossible, the day a mysterious donor had paid for everything and refused to be named. She'd been 23, alone in Seoul, terrified of losing the only family she had left, and somehow Seong Hwan had been there. "You weren't supposed to see that." His voice came from the doorway, devoid of anger, just resignation. Esther turned, the photograph trembling in her hands. "This was you, the hospital donation, the surgery, that was you?" He didn't deny it, didn't explain, just stood there, backlit by the hallway, the snake tattoo visible above his collar. "Why?" The question was barely a whisper. "Because you were crying." He said it like it explained everything, like watching a stranger cry outside a hospital was reason enough to pay for life-saving surgery. "Because you looked like the world was ending and I could fix it." "You don't even know me." "I wanted to." He moved into the room, not approaching, just occupying the same space. "From that day forward, I wanted to know you. But a man like me, with a life like mine, what could I offer someone like you except danger? So you watched from afar instead." "I kept you safe from afar," he corrected. "Made sure your neighborhood stayed clean. Made sure the right opportunities came your way at work. Made sure Michael's debts would eventually lead him back to me." The implications settled over her like snow. "You engineered this, the debt, the wedding, all of it." "I didn't make Michael cruel, didn't make him choose that heiress over you." His eyes held hers, unflinching. "But yes, I made sure that when he revealed his true nature, I'd be there to catch you." Esther should have been angry, should have felt manipulated, used, turned into a chess piece in someone else's game. But all she felt was a strange, vertiginous sense of being seen, really seen, not as a joke or a project or something to be fixed, as someone worth saving. "That's insane," she said. "I know." He took a step closer, close enough that she could see the fine details of his tattoo, the way the snake's scales were individual works of art. "I'm not asking you to understand, just to stay, to let me prove that you were worth every moment I spent watching, worth more than Michael ever deserved." Her hand reached up without permission, fingers hovering near the snake's head inked into his skin. "Can I?" The question was soft, intimate in a way that had nothing to do with contracts or arrangements. He nodded and she touched the tattoo. His skin was warm, the ink smooth under her fingertips. She traced the serpent's curve down his neck, felt. His pulse jumped beneath her touch. "Why a snake?" she asked. "Because it covers a scar." His voice had gone rough, strained. 10 years ago, developers tried to demolish your grandmother's neighborhood. I stopped them, violently. One of them had a knife. She stared at him, pieces clicking into place. "The Viper isn't just a nickname." "No, it's a warning. Cross me and I strike. Hurt what's mine and I'm lethal." "Am I yours?" The question hung between them, charged with implications neither of them was ready to name. His hand came up, mirroring hers, fingers brushing her cheek with devastating gentleness. "You've been mine since the day I watched you cry outside that hospital. I just wasn't strong enough to claim you until now." The kiss, when it came, was nothing like she'd expected, not forceful or demanding, but achingly soft, a question posed in the language of touch. His lips moved against hers with the careful precision of a man handling something infinitely precious, infinitely fragile. Esther kissed him back, tasting whiskey and truth and the dangerous promise of being valued by someone who'd spent years learning how to value her. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, his forehead rested against hers. "1 year," he whispered. 1 year, she agreed. But they both knew the contract was already meaningless. This was never going to end in 12 months. This was just beginning. Somewhere across Seoul, Michael sat in his empty apartment, staring at his phone, watching the headlines change, watching Esther transform from punchline to princess, and realized he'd lost something he'd never actually deserved to have. But that was his story. This one belonged to someone else now. The gala invitation arrived on embossed cardstock, gold lettering announcing the annual YK Industries charity event. Esther held it like it might catch fire, reading the elegant script that named her as Seong Hwan's +1. No, as his wife, Mrs. Seong. "You don't have to go," Seong Hwan said from the doorway of her room. 3 weeks had passed since their kiss, 3 weeks of careful distance and loaded glances, of learning to exist in the same space without combusting. "I can attend alone." "And let them think I'm hiding?" Esther set the invitation down with more confidence than she felt. "No, I'll go." His smile was small but genuine. "Then let's give them something to talk about." The dress arrived the next morning in a box wrapped in black silk. When Esther lifted the lid, she forgot how to breathe. Emerald green fabric spilled out like liquid gemstone, a gown that would cling and flow in equal measure, that would demand attention and refuse to apologize for it. She wore it the night of the gala, standing before her mirror as the zipper closed, watching herself transform. The woman looking back wasn't the bride who'd been humiliated, wasn't even the uncertain girl who'd signed a contract 3 weeks ago. This woman was something new, something forged in fire. Seong Hwan was waiting in the living room, and when she descended the stairs, she watched him go perfectly still. His eyes tracked over her with an intensity that made her skin warm, made her aware of every inch of fabric touching her body. "Beautiful," he said, the word rough around its edges. Not a compliment, a fact. The gala was held at Seoul's Grand Hyatt, a ballroom dripping with crystal and old money. Esther entered on Seong Hwan's arm, and the room's attention pivoted toward them like a weapon. Conversation stuttered. Glasses paused halfway to lips. She felt the weight of their stares, their judgment, their fascination. "Breathe," Seong Hwan murmured against her ear. "You're the most stunning woman here, and they know it." She wasn't sure she believed him, but she lifted her chin anyway, channeling every ounce of dignity her grandmother had taught her. They moved through the crowd, and she felt the whispers follow like shadows. "That's her? The one. From the video?" I heard she used witchcraft, some African voodoo thing. Poor man probably doesn't realize what he's gotten himself into. The comments crawled under her skin, familiar poison in elegant packaging. Esther's steps faltered, old insecurities rising, but Seong Hwan's hand tightened on hers, anchoring, reminding her she wasn't alone. They found their table near the front, positioned where everyone could see them. Champagne flowed, speeches droned. Esther smiled until her face ached, playing the role of devoted wife while her stomach churned with anxiety. "Mrs. Seong," the voice came from behind her, dripping with false sweetness. Esther turned to find a woman in her 50s, dripping in diamonds, her smile sharp as broken glass. "How fascinating to finally meet you. We've all been so curious about the woman who managed to trap Seoul's most eligible bachelor." The table went quiet. Seong Hwan's jaw tightened, but Esther felt something shift inside her, something that had been dormant, beaten down by Michael's cruelty and years of making herself smaller to fit into spaces that didn't want her. "Trap?" Esther's voice was steady, clear. "That's an interesting word choice, Mrs. Park. Mrs. Park." "Well, Mrs. Park, I didn't trap anyone. Your eligible bachelor chose me, pursued me, claimed me in front of 300 witnesses because he decided I was worth having." She stood, the emerald dress catching the light, making her look like something between a queen and a flame. "But I understand your confusion. After all, it must be difficult to comprehend that a man like Seong Hwan would want a woman like me. That says more about your limitations than it does about our relationship." Mrs. Park's face went white, then red. Around them, phones appeared, recording, but this time Esther didn't flinch. Let them record. Let them watch her stand up for herself. "How dare you?" "No!" Esther's voice cut through the attempted protest like a blade. "How dare you? How dare you reduce me to stereotypes and superstitions because you can't imagine that I might simply be someone worth loving? That reflects your poverty, not mine." Silence expanded like a shock wave. Mrs. Park sputtered, searching for a response, finding none. She turned and fled, her dignity in tatters. Esther sat down, her heart hammering, half expecting Seong Hwan to be angry, to tell her she'd overstepped. Instead, when she looked at him, he was smiling. Not the careful, controlled expression he showed the world, but something genuine and warm and proud. "That," he said quietly, "was magnificent." The rest of the evening passed in a blur of congratulations and barely concealed shock. People approached carefully now, with more respect, as if Esther had proven herself worthy of her place at Seong Hwan's side. By the time they left, she felt exhausted and exhilarated in equal measure. In the car ride home, Seong Hwan's hand found hers in the darkness. "You didn't need me to defend you tonight." "No," she agreed. "I didn't." "Good." His fingers tightened around hers. "You're becoming who you were always meant to be." The words stayed with her as they rode through Seoul's neon-lit streets, as the city blurred past like a fever dream. She was changing, becoming, and somehow, impossibly, it felt like coming home. Days blurred into weeks. Esther fell into the strange rhythm of her new life. Mornings spent in the penthouse, afternoons shopping or meeting with charities Seong Hwan supported, evenings at galas, and dinners where she played the role of devoted wife. But the role was becoming less performance and more reality with each passing day. She noticed things about him, the way he took his coffee black, 3 sugars, how he worked late into the night, his study glowing like a lighthouse, the careful distance he maintained, never pushing, never demanding more than she was willing to give. He was patient in a way that made her ache. One afternoon, while Seong Hwan was at a business meeting, Esther found herself drawn again to his study. The photograph of her crying outside the hospital was still there, face down on his desk like a secret shame. But this time, she noticed a drawer slightly ajar, and curiosity pulled at her like gravity. Inside, she found a box, plain white cardboard, unremarkable except for the weight of it. Her hands trembled as she lifted the lid. Photographs, dozens of them, hundreds, maybe, all of her. Esther at 23, leaving her grandmother's hospital room, relief written across her face. Esther at 25, laughing with coworkers at a company dinner. Esther at 27, walking through a park, feeding pigeons. Years of her life documented in careful detail, each photo marking a moment she'd never known was being preserved. She wasn't sure whether to be touched or terrified. This was obsession, wasn't it? This careful cataloging of her existence, this silent watching from the shadows. But as she looked at each image, she saw something else too. Protection. In every photo, she was safe, happy, unaware that someone was ensuring her world remained intact. I knew you'd find them eventually. Seong Hwan's voice was resigned, not angry. He stood in the doorway, his jacket discarded, his tie loosened. The snake tattoo seemed to move in the low light. I should have thrown them away, should have let you believe the story was simpler than it is. Esther set down the photo she'd been holding, herself at 26, wearing a yellow dress, smiling at something off camera. How long? 7 years since that day at the hospital. He moved into the room, maintaining distance, giving her space to process. I told myself I was just making sure you were safe, that it was protective, not possessive. But the truth is messier than that. You were stalking me. Yes. No defense, no excuse, just acknowledgement. I am. I've built my life around making sure yours continued safely. Is that love or madness? I'm not sure there's a difference. Esther looked at the photographs spread across his desk, years of her life through someone else's eyes. She should have been horrified, should have run, but all she felt was a strange, dizzying warmth. Someone had cared enough to watch, to remember, to preserve moments she thought were lost to time. My grandmother died 2 years ago, she said quietly. You knew that, didn't you? I was at the funeral, in the back. You never saw me. And the job at the marketing firm, the promotion last year? I ensured you were noticed. You did the rest. Your talent is your own, Esther. I just made sure the right people were paying attention. She turned to face him fully. This man who'd shaped her life from the shadows, who'd protected her from dangers she'd never known existed. That's not normal, Seong Hwan. No, he agreed. It's not. I'm not. I've never pretended to be anything other than what I am, someone who saw something precious and decided it was worth protecting, even from a distance, even if you never knew I existed. But why not approach me? Why the surveillance instead of just talking to me? His laugh was bitter, self-deprecating. Because look at me, Esther. Look at what I am. A criminal. A man whose hands are stained with violence and blood. What could I offer you except contamination? How could I ask someone like you to love someone like me? The vulnerability in his voice cracked something open inside her. She crossed the space between them, her hands finding his face, forcing him to look at her. You're asking now. No. His hands came up to cover hers, holding them against his cheeks. I'm confessing. There's a difference. I'm telling you that I've loved you for 7 years. That watching you smile in these photographs has been the purest part of my life. That claiming you at that altar wasn't calculation, it was desperation. I couldn't watch you break anymore. Esther kissed him, and this time, there was no hesitation, no careful distance. This was need and recognition, and the strange relief of being fully seen. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, she kept her forehead pressed to his. 1 year was a lie, she whispered. Yes, he agreed. This is insane. Yes, I think I'm falling in love with you too. His arms wrapped around her, pulling her close, and for the first time in 7 years of watching from the shadows, Seong Hwan held what he'd always wanted. And Esther let herself be held by someone who'd proven, in the strangest possible way, that she was worth protecting. But in Seoul's underworld, peace was always temporary. Michael Park sat in his studio apartment, a dramatic downgrade from the luxury condo Diana had promised him, staring at his phone. The screen showed Esther at last night's gala, stunning in emerald green, standing up to Mrs. Park with a confidence that made his chest tighten with something ugly and familiar, jealousy. She was supposed to be nothing, the joke, the woman too ugly to marry. Instead, she'd become everything he'd pretended Diana would make him: wealthy, connected, respected. And it was all Seong Hwan's doing. The debt still hung over Michael like a noose. 3 million won. Seong Hwan had said it was settled, that taking Esther had cleared the balance, but Michael knew how these things worked. The Viper never truly forgave, never truly forgot. His phone rang. Unknown number. Michael answered anyway, desperate for any lifeline. Mr. Park, the voice was smooth, cultured, dangerous. My name is Baek Jin-ho. I believe we have a mutual problem named Seong Hwan. Michael's pulse quickened. Baek Jin-ho, the White Tiger, Seong Hwan's most bitter rival, the gang leader whose territory bordered the Vipers, whose ambitions had been thwarted repeatedly by Seong Hwan's calculated moves. I'm listening, Michael said. The meeting happened in a noribang in Gangnam, private room thick with cigarette smoke and expensive whiskey. Baek Jin-ho was younger than Michael expected, maybe 40, with silver rings on every finger and a tiger tattoo that wrapped around his throat like a collar. The Viper has made himself vulnerable, Baek said, pouring soju with practiced ease. For 7 years he's been untouchable. No family, no lovers, no pressure points. But now, he smiled, showing too many teeth. Now he has a wife. Esther, Michael said, the name tasting like ash. Esther, Baek confirmed, his weakness, his soft spot, the one thing he values more than territory or money or power. He leaned forward, his eyes glittering with malice. Help me take her, and your debt disappears. Refuse, and I'll make sure the Viper knows you came to me first. Michael should have said no, should have walked away. But 3 million won was a mountain of debt, and his pride was a gaping wound that Esther's success kept tearing open. What do you need me to do? The answer came 3 days later. Esther had ventured out to Myeongdong for shopping, accompanied by 2 of Seong Hwan's bodyguards, discreet shadows who maintained respectful distance. She was examining silk scarves at a boutique when her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. He's using you. Ask him about the hospital donation. Ask him how long he's been watching. Her blood went cold. Someone knew. Someone had discovered Seong Hwan's surveillance, his 7-year obsession. She looked up from her phone, suddenly hyper-aware of the crowded street, the faces blurring past. That's when she saw Michael. He stood across the street, partially hidden by a food cart, but she'd recognize that gray suit anywhere, the same one from the wedding. He was watching her with an expression she couldn't read, longing, hatred, calculation all mixed together. Esther took a step back, instinct screaming danger. The bodyguards moved closer, flanking her, their hands moving beneath their jackets. But Michael wasn't alone. Men emerged from the crowd, too, many too organized. White tiger patches visible on their jackets. Mrs. Seong, the voice came from behind her. She spun to find a man with silver rings and a predator's smile. Mr. Baek would like a word. Your husband has something that belongs to us, and we think you're the perfect person to negotiate its return. The bodyguards moved, but they were outnumbered. A brief struggle, professional and quick. One went down with a knife to his thigh, the other tackled by 3 men. Esther screamed, and a hand clamped over her mouth, rough and chemical-smelling. The world tilted, darkened, but before consciousness faded completely, she heard Baek's voice, pleased and poisonous. The Viper's about to learn what happens when he lets his guard down. She woke to the sound of her own heartbeat, thunder loud in her ears. warehouse, abandoned from the smell of rust and decay. Her hands were zip-tied behind a chair, her ankles bound. Michael stood near the entrance, pacing, his face sheened with sweat. "This wasn't supposed to happen like this," he was saying to someone she couldn't see. "You said it would be clean, in and out." "Plans change." Baek Jin-ho emerged from the shadows, checking his watch. "The Viper will be here soon. He's predictable when it comes to his precious wife." Esther's mind raced through panic toward something colder, more calculated. Seong Hwan would come. That was certain. The question was whether she'd still be alive when he arrived. "Michael." Her voice came out hoarse but steady. "You don't have to do this. Whatever they promised you, it's not worth it." He turned to her, and she saw something broken in his eyes. "You're right. It's not worth it. But neither were you, apparently. Yet here we are, with you worth more than I could ever afford." "That's not—" "Shut up," his voice cracked. "Just shut up. You were supposed to be nothing, Esther. The ugly girl, the joke. Instead, you're living in a penthouse, wearing clothes that cost more than my car, married to one of the most powerful men in Seoul." He crossed to her, grabbed her face roughly. "You were supposed to stay small, stay broken, stay beneath me." "I was never beneath you," she said quietly. "You just convinced me I was. That was your power, Michael. Manipulation. But I see you now. I see exactly what you are." His hand pulled back to strike her, but Beck's voice stopped him. "Don't damage her. The Viper needs to see her whole, at least initially." The next hour stretched like years. Esther watched the warehouse entrance, watched Michael pace, watched Bayek's men position themselves with professional precision. They were expecting war, and Seong Hwan was obliging them. The doors exploded inward with enough force to tear them from their hinges. Seong Hwan entered like a natural disaster, flanked by 20 men, all armed, all moving with lethal coordination. His face was a mask of cold fury, the snake tattoo seeming to writhe with barely contained violence. His eyes found Esther immediately, and she watched relief and rage war across his features. "Release her," he said, his voice carrying across the warehouse like a blade. "And maybe I'll let some of you live." Baek laughed, the sound echoing off metal walls. "You're not in a position to make threats, Viper. I have your wife, your weakness, your one vulnerability in 7 years of perfect isolation." "You have my entire reason for existing," Seong Hwan corrected, and the temperature in the warehouse seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Which means you've made the last mistake of your life." Michael moved then, panicked and stupid. He pulled a gun from his jacket, shaking hands, amateur grip, and pressed it against Esther's temple. "Nobody moves. Nobody fucking moves, or I'll—" "You'll what?" Esther's voice was steady, stronger than she'd expected. She looked past the gun, past Michael's trembling hands, and locked eyes with Seong Hwan across the warehouse. "You'll kill me. The woman you spent a year pretending to love? The woman you called ugly in front of 300 people. "Esther, don't," Michael's voice cracked. "No." She turned her head, forcing him to look at her despite the gun. "You wanted me to look in a mirror, Michael. Said I needed to see what I really was. Well, I've looked. And you know what I see?" She smiled, and it was genuine, radiant, free. "I see a woman who is beautiful, who is loved, who is worth more than you could ever comprehend." "You're nothing," Michael screamed, but his gun hand was shaking so badly the barrel wavered. "You're nothing without him." "No," Seong Hwan's voice cut across the space, certain and absolute. "She was always everything. I just made sure the world finally noticed." The gunshot that followed seemed to happen in slow motion. Michael's finger tightened on the trigger, whether from intention or panic Esther would never know, but the bullet never found her. Seong Hwan moved like lightning, like the Viper his reputation promised. 20 feet crossed in seconds, his hand catching Michael's wrist, twisting with surgical precision. The gun clattered to concrete. Then Seong Hwan's fist connected with Michael's face once, twice, 3 times, each impact carrying 7 years of watching Esther diminish herself for this man's approval. Michael went down hard, blood pouring from his nose, and Seong Hwan followed him down, his hands finding Michael's throat. "You pointed a gun at my wife," he said, his voice empty of emotion, which was somehow more terrifying than rage. "You threatened the only thing I value in this world." His hands tightened. Michael's face purpled. Around them, chaos erupted as Bayek's men and Seong Hwan's crew clashed, but the real violence was happening right here, in this intimate moment of reckoning. "Seong Hwan," Esther's voice cut through everything, clear and commanding. "Stop." His hands didn't loosen. "Seong Hwan, look at me." Slowly, reluctantly, his eyes left Michael's panicked face and found hers. She saw murder in those eyes, saw the monster he kept carefully caged. "Let him go," she said softly. "He's not worth it. He's not worth you becoming what he always accused you of being. He tried to kill you. And he failed, because I'm stronger than he ever gave me credit for. Because you made sure I survived long enough to figure that out." She held his gaze, steady and sure. "But killing him makes him a martyr, makes me a victim. And I'm done being a victim, Seong Hwan. I'm done letting men like him define my worth." For a long moment, Seong Hwan didn't move. Then, with visible effort, his hands released Michael's throat. Michael gasped, rolled away, coughing and broken. "Get him out of here," Seong Hwan ordered his men. "Call the police. Attempted murder, kidnapping, extortion. I want him buried under enough charges that he'll never see daylight again." Michael was dragged away, still gasping, and Seong Hwan finally turned his full attention to Esther. His hands were gentle as they cut her zip ties, careful as they checked her for injuries. When he was satisfied she was unharmed, he pulled her against him, his forehead pressing to hers. "I thought I'd lost you," he whispered, and his voice was ragged, raw. "For 7 years I've watched you, protected you, loved you from a distance, and in one moment I almost lost everything because I let my guard down." "No," Esther corrected, her hands finding his face, holding him close. "You almost lost everything because you love me. Real love comes with risk, Seong Hwan. Real love means being vulnerable. And I'd rather have this danger and fear and the possibility of loss than go back to being safe and invisible and unloved." He kissed her then, desperate and claiming, and she kissed him back with equal intensity. Around them, police sirens wailed. Baek Jin-ho and his remaining men fled into Seoul's night. Michael was loaded into a police car, his gray suit stained with blood and failure. But Esther and Seong Hwan stood in the center of the warehouse, holding each other, choosing each other, finally free. 3 months later, the penthouse was filled with flowers. Not the sickening lilies from her first wedding, but cherry blossoms and peonies, delicate and beautiful. Esther stood before a different mirror, wearing a different dress, traditional Korean hanbok in deep blue silk, embroidered with silver cranes. "The contract expired yesterday," Seong Hwan said from the doorway. He wore traditional dress too, black with silver accents that matched her gown. "1 year, you're free to leave whenever you want." Esther turned to face him, this man who'd watched her for 7 years, who'd saved her from public humiliation, who'd loved her in the strangest and most absolute way possible. "Is that what you want? For me to leave?" "No." His voice was steady, certain. "I want you to stay, but I want it to be your choice, not an obligation, not a contract signed under duress." She crossed to him, her hands finding his, fingers interlacing. "Michael's in prison. 20 years, the prosecutor said. The debt is settled. The threat is gone." She smiled, and it was radiant, transformative. "So ask me properly, not as payment for a debt, not as performance for the world. Ask me because you want me to stay." Seong Hwan's grip tightened on her hands. "Esther, will you stay? Will you be my wife? Not in contract, but in truth? Will you let me love you the way you deserve to be loved? Yes, she said simply, but on one condition. Anything. No more photographs taken without my knowledge. If you want to remember moments, you have to be in them with me. His laugh was surprised and genuine. Deal. The ceremony was small, just them and a handful of witnesses, people who'd proven their loyalty, who understood that this wasn't a business arrangement or a social performance. This was a vow between two people who'd found each other in the wreckage of separate disasters. When the officiant pronounced them married, truly married, Seong Hwan lifted Esther's veil with hands that trembled slightly. The vulnerability in that small gesture made her eyes sting. I've wanted to do this properly for 7 years, he whispered. Then do it properly now, she whispered back. The kiss was everything their first kiss hadn't been. Not desperate or tentative, but certain. Claiming not through possession, but through choice. When they broke apart, Seong Hwan rested his forehead against hers, the snake tattoo visible above his collar, no longer just a warning, but a promise. My wife, he said, and the words carried wonder. My husband, she replied, and meant it. Outside, Seoul glittered in the evening light. The video of her humiliation had faded from trending status, replaced by newer scandals, fresher heartbreaks. But Esther's story, her real story, was just beginning, not as a victim or a joke or someone's possession, as a woman who'd learned her worth in the most unexpected way possible, who'd found love in the shadows and chosen to step into the light anyway, who'd transformed from a bride in tears to a queen who commanded her own narrative. Michael rotted in prison, his debts unpaid, his reputation destroyed. Diana had disappeared into obscurity, her family's fortune unable to buy her way out of association with attempted murder. Mrs. Park apologized publicly, profusely, her diamonds unable to polish away the stain of her racism. But these were footnotes now, side characters in someone else's story. The real story belonged to Esther and Seong Hwan, two broken people who'd found each other through surveillance and obsession and the strange alchemy of love that couldn't be planned or controlled. Two people who'd chosen each other not despite their damage, but because of it. As the sun set over Seoul, painting the sky in shades of amber and gold, Esther stood at the penthouse window, Seong Hwan's arms around her waist, and finally understood what it meant to be seen, not as an object of pity or mockery, not as someone's project or possession, as herself, fully, completely, beautifully herself. And that was worth every strange twist of the journey that had brought her here.